Stand on the northern side of what will one day become Sydney Harbour and look south, but do not look for water. 50,000 years ago, the view is almost unrecognizable. Sea level is far lower. The place we now call Sydney Harbour is a river valley running east toward a coastline much farther away. Forest and open country cover sandstone ridges. Fresh water cuts through the landscape below us, and people are already here. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have lived across this continent for at least 65,000 years, sustaining hundreds of cultures and more than 250 language groups. So even when our 50,000-year clock begins, the human story of Australia has already started. Generations hunt, fish, gather plants, make tools, care for country, exchange knowledge, and read a landscape that is not empty wilderness, but a living network of places, stories, and responsibilities. Now watch the first transformation. It is not a city, it is not an empire, it is the ocean. As the Ice Age ends, global seas rise. Over thousands of years, the old river valley slowly floods. Hills become headlands, high ground becomes islands, salt water advances inland. By roughly 6,000 to 7,000 years ago, something close to the modern harbor has formed. The people do not disappear when the landscape changes, they adapt to it. Fishing intensifies, shellfish become important, canoes cross coves that did not exist thousands of years earlier. New shorelines gain names, meaning, and memory. Australia will change again and again, but the oldest cultures on this land will continue through those changes. And then, after tens of thousands of years, unfamiliar sails appear offshore. In 1770, James Cook maps the east coast for Britain. That comes 18 years later. January 1788, 11 ships of the First Fleet enter Port Jackson carrying convicts, marines, officers, and supplies. Captain Arthur Phillip chooses Sydney Cove for a settlement. Trees begin falling, tents appear, then huts, then storehouses. Smoke rises from land belonging to the Gadigal people. The newcomers call the place Sydney. To Britain, this is a new penal colony. To Aboriginal people around the harbour, it is the beginning of colonisation, loss of country, new diseases, and the colony nearly fails. The soil around Sydney Cove disappoints. Early crops struggle. Food runs short. The settlement is isolated on the far side of the world, but ships keep arriving. Convicts build roads and public works. Farming expands inland. Parramatta grows. The colony pushes beyond Sydney. Then the map of Australia begins filling with British colonies. Van Diemen's Land becomes Tasmania. Settlements grow in Western Australia, South Australia, Victoria, and Queensland. Convict transportation continues in parts of Australia until 1868, and expansion carries another cost. Across the continent, pastoral settlement moves onto Aboriginal lands. Frontier conflict follows. Indigenous communities resist, survive, adapt, and endure through violence, dispossession, and introduced disease. But the real transformation is happening far beyond the harbour. Britain is turning a continent of ancient sovereign cultures into a group of settler colonies. Then, in 1851, the ground itself changes the speed of history. Gold. News spreads through New South Wales and Victoria. Gold has been found. Almost overnight, people begin moving. Ships fill with migrants. Workers abandon jobs. Towns appear near diggings. At Ballarat, Bendigo, and other fields, tents spread across the landscape. People arrive from Britain, Europe, North America, and China. Between 1851 and 1871, the Australian population grows from about 430,000 to 1.7 million. This is not merely a mining boom. It changes who lives here, where wealth flows, and what people expect from government. On the Victorian goldfields, anger over mining licenses and policing culminates in the Eureka Stockade in 1854. The rebellion is quickly defeated, but the political pressure surrounding the goldfields contributes to a broader democratic culture. secret ballots, expanded male voting rights, and the 8-hour movement become part of the colonial story. And Sydney changes with the boom. More ships crowd the harbor. Banks, warehouses, and stone buildings replace parts of the early colonial town. Railways spread outward. Telegraph lines make distance feel smaller. For the first time, the separate colonies begin to feel physically connected. But they are still separate. Different tariffs, different railway systems, different governments, different identities. A person can travel across the continent and cross political boundaries without leaving what we now call Australia. By the late 19th century, one question becomes harder to avoid. Should these colonies become one nation? Look at our harbor in the 1890s. Sydney is already a substantial city. Steamships move through the water. Railways connect suburbs and inland towns. Factories produce noise and smoke. But there is still no Commonwealth of Australia. The colonies debate federation for years. Defense matters, trade matters, immigration matters, national identity matters. Eventually, referendums approve a federal constitution. And on January 1, 1901, 6 colonies unite as the Commonwealth of Australia. In Sydney, crowds celebrate. A new nation exists. But the beginning contains a contradiction that will echo through the next century. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are largely excluded from the political story the new Commonwealth tells about itself. And among the first major laws passed by the federal parliament are measures designed to restrict non-European immigration, the system later known as the White Australia policy. Australia has united, but it has also drawn lines around who its leaders believe should belong. The next test will come not from inside the continent, but from a war on the other side of the world. 1914. Britain declares war on Germany. Australia enters the First World War as part of the British Empire. Thousands volunteer. Ships leave Australian ports carrying soldiers who believe they may be gone only months. They are wrong. In 1915, Australian and New Zealand troops land on the Gallipoli Peninsula. The campaign becomes a military failure for the Allied forces and a victory for the Ottoman defenders. But in Australia, Gallipoli becomes something more complicated than a battlefield. The Anzac story grows into a major national memory. Then, the Western Front takes an even greater toll. When the war finally ends, Australia is more conscious of itself as a nation, but deeply scarred by loss. It sees departures, then returns. Memorials appear. Empty places remain in families. Now skip forward. The skyline changes. Construction begins on an enormous steel arch across the harbor. For years, 2 halves climb toward each other. In 1932, the Sydney Harbour Bridge opens. The transformation is almost violent. A waterway crossed by canoes for thousands of years is now spanned by steel. Australia looks modern. Then, less than 10 years later, war reaches much closer to home. The Second World War transforms Australia's sense of security. Japan enters the Pacific War. Singapore falls. On February 19, 1942, Japanese aircraft attack Darwin. Ships are sunk. Buildings are destroyed. It is the first of dozens of raids against the Darwin area. For Australians who had long looked toward Britain for security, geography suddenly feels different. Asia is not distant. The Pacific is not protection. War is now touching the continent itself. Australian forces fight in the Middle East, the Pacific, and New Guinea. When the war ends in 1945, the country makes a strategic decision. It needs more people. A large immigration program begins, and this will transform Australia more deeply than almost any new building. Between 1945 and 1965, around 2 million immigrants arrive. At first, policy still favors Europeans. British migrants arrive under assisted schemes. Then people come from Italy, Greece, the Netherlands, Germany, the Baltic states, and elsewhere. Many work in factories, construction, and huge infrastructure projects, such as the Snowy Mountains hydroelectric scheme. Suburbs spread, cars multiply, factories expand. New foods, languages, and traditions become part of everyday Australian life. The old expectation that national identity must be overwhelmingly British begins weakening. The White Australia policy is gradually dismantled, with its final remnants removed in 1973. Then migration from Asia, the Middle East, and other parts of the world grows. Australia is becoming multicultural. Bennelong Point, because there, another impossible shape is rising. White concrete shells curve over the harbour. In 1973, the Sydney Opera House opens. Where Gadigal people had lived and gathered, where colonial buildings once stood, there is now an architectural symbol recognized across the world. The harbour has become an image of modern Australia. But the nation is also beginning to confront histories that its earlier national story pushed aside. For much of the 20th century, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people live under layers of discriminatory laws and policies. In different states and territories, governments exercise extensive control over movement, work, wages, family life, and residence. Children are removed from families under policies that create what become known as the stolen generations. But resistance never disappears. Indigenous activists organize, they petition, strike, march, establish organizations, demand land rights and equal treatment. In 1967, nearly 91% of voters support constitutional changes relating to Aboriginal people, giving the Commonwealth power to make laws for them and removing the exclusion from population counts in the Constitution. It is a landmark, but not an ending. In 1992, the High Court's Mabo decision recognizes native title and rejects the legal fiction of terra nullius. The following year, Parliament passes the Native Title Act. Then, in 2000, hundreds of thousands of people walk across the Sydney Harbour Bridge in support of reconciliation. The bridge that once symbolized modern engineering becomes a platform for confronting the country's oldest unfinished question: who owns the story of Australia? In 2008, the Australian Parliament formally apologizes to the stolen generations. The past has not disappeared. It has become part of the national argument about the future. Sydney hosts the 2000 Olympic Games, projecting a confident image to a global audience, while Indigenous performers and cultural references become part of the ceremony's story. Mining booms tie Australia closely to Asian economies. Universities attract international students. Cities spread outward and upward. Yet geography keeps refusing to become background scenery. Drought, bushfire, flood, and extreme heat repeatedly remind Australians that infrastructure does not cancel the continent's environmental power. The contrast becomes sharper. One of the world's most urbanized societies still lives on an ancient, variable land. And the same question returns in a new form. How does a nation adapt today without forgetting the older knowledge, landscapes, and communities that existed long before the nation itself? The year is 2026. The valley from our opening is gone beneath deep blue harbor water. The forested shoreline has become a global city. The Harbour Bridge dominates one side of the view. The Opera House rises from Bennelong Point. Ferries cut white lines across the water. Glass towers rise behind Circular Quay. Aircraft cross a sky that once held no machines. And people whose families came from almost every part of the world move through a place inhabited by First Nations peoples for tens of thousands of years. Modern Australia is wealthy, urban, and deeply connected to the Indo-Pacific and the wider world. It saw the coastline move. It saw British settlement arrive. It saw colonies become a federation. It saw a nation define itself through exclusion and later dismantle much of that system. It saw war shift Australia's strategic attention from Britain toward its own region. It saw migration change the population. And it saw Indigenous histories move from the margins of the national narrative back toward its center. That is why this story cannot end with a skyline. The most important changes were never only buildings. They were changes in who held power, who was allowed to belong, whose history was recognized, and what Australians believed the country actually was. Go back one final time, 50,000 years. Because Sydney Harbour does not yet exist, it faces a valley. People already know this country. Then, the climate warms. The ocean enters. The harbour forms. Thousands of generations live around it before Britain even knows this coast exists. Then, 11 ships arrive. The trees fall. The settlement struggles. The colony survives. Gold accelerates everything. Separate colonies become one commonwealth. The new nation goes to war. Steel crosses the harbour. Bombs fall on Darwin. Millions of migrants arrive. An opera house rises. Old immigration barriers fall. Indigenous activists force questions the nation had avoided. Mabo changes Australian land law. A bridge built as a symbol of progress fills with people walking for reconciliation. And now the harbour looks permanent. But permanence is the illusion. The water itself was once land. The nation itself is only a tiny fraction of the human history of this continent. Australia did not begin in 1788. It did not begin in 1901. And it did not become complete when a flag was raised or a constitution came into force. The deeper story is one of continuity and disruption existing at the same time. Ancient cultures survived enormous environmental change. Colonization transformed land and lives. Migration transformed the population. War transformed security. Political struggle transformed rights. And every generation inherited a country different from the one before it. That is what 50,000 years reveal. Not a straight line from ancient land to modern nation. Layers. Country beneath colony. Colony beneath federation. Federation beneath the multicultural democracy of today. And beneath all of them, the oldest continuous human connections to this continent. Look across the harbour one last time. The bridge looks permanent. The opera house looks permanent. The skyline looks permanent. So did every world that came before them. 50,000 years, one piece of country, countless transformations, and a nation whose story is still being argued, expanded, and rewritten. This is Australia.